I will hand it over to Linda Killian, and she is going to make the opening remarks. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Rosemary. Well, welcome to the very first educational symposium sponsored by Republican Women of Westchester and the Putnam County Republican Women's Organization. Thank you all for coming, and we have a very, very good group of panelists, and I believe after this afternoon that you will come away from the presentations with a greater understanding of the scope of what we're facing in our public schools from an educational standpoint and also from a medical and psychological standpoint. We put together a group of people who represent academia, think tanks, and also people who are activists. And I think that as a result, you'll really get some very down-to-earth type of information about what's happening. Central to the theme of what people will be discussing today, and I don't even know exactly what it is, but will be the family and what the progressive left is trying to do to destroy the family. In the United States, as in England, there's a long tradition of parental rights. Parents are responsible for the moral, educational, and physical well-being of their children. Not the state, but the parents. And it's not only grounded in our way of government and our Americanism, but it's in the Bible, it's in the Torah. There are only 3 individuals that the Torah says that you must fear. God, your mother, and your father. And there's a reason for that. And the school system is trying to make them be the one individual, the one thing that the young people are supposed to fear, the state. We cannot let that happen. And I do hope that as a result of today that you'll be thinking about this and perhaps becoming more active in your school and having a sense of how to confront the schools, the teachers, and the administrators. Before we get started and I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to, for everybody to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're so lucky to have William Jacobson join us as our keynote speaker today. William Jacobson, if you haven't heard of him, is a highly respected and very outspoken professor of law at Cornell University. He is the founder and inspiration for the website Legal Insurrection, which I hope you all will start visiting on a daily or weekly basis. And he also started the website Critical Race. So without any more introduction, Bill, would you please come up?
Thank you, Linda, and thanks to the others who put this event together. I have a speech prepared, but I made the mistake of having a 3-hour drive here, so I got to do a lot of thinking. And so I've reworked it a little, so I'm going to do this a little on the fly. And what Linda said is exactly what I was thinking about on the way here, that this is not a fight over curriculum. Yes, curriculum's part of the fight. This is not a fight over who's going to be on a school board, although part of the fight is who's going to be on a school board. It really is a fight for 2 things. One, it's a fight for parents, the right of parents to act as parents for their children. And what you're seeing go on, whether it's critical race theory or it's the new radical gender theory, undoubtedly is trying to separate parents from their children, trying to replace parent with the state. And we've seen this before. We've seen this movie before. Okay? Now, if you know my background at all, and you probably don't, I was a Russian studies major in college. I studied in Moscow. At the time, please don't anybody speak Russian to me. At the time, I was fluent in Russian, so I was there during the Cold War. And that's exactly what the state does. The state becomes the parent.
Excuse me, Bill, could you just lean more into the mic? The back row is...
Yeah, so I'll speak up. So the state becomes the parent. And that's a lot of what we see going on here now. Probably more so with the gender stuff than with the critical race stuff. But you see schools implementing policies that will not tell parents about medical care and psychiatric care given to their children and things like that. But it's also not just a fight for parents' rights. It's a fight, to me, for national survival. And that's particularly with regard to the critical race stuff, because I have followed in one form or another critical race theory since before anybody called it critical race theory. Critical race theory started in the late 80s, early 90s, but before critical race theory, there was critical legal theory. And critical legal theory started and developed, for the most part, at Harvard Law School in the late 1970s and early 1980s. I graduated in 1984. So I saw this developing. And all of the racialization of the law and the racialization of these concepts was very obvious to me back then. And one thing that I noticed is the career paths that my colleagues took, my fellow students took. The students who were not radicalized went into law, went into business, went into, to some extent, government. Okay, so I'm just watching the news and I see my classmates all the time. But the most radical students went into academia. And in fact, one of those students, my classmate, was the woman who developed the concept of intersectionality and coined the phrase critical race theory. And all of the things that I saw going on back there, turning everything into a racial issue, trying to play people off against each other, using race as the tool, was evident before anybody even coined the phrase critical race theory. And that's what you see going on now with critical race theory in schools. Most of what we focus on at Legal Insurrection and at criticalrace.org is higher education, but we also focus to some extent on K through 12. And we've seen this migration of these concepts, these race-focused concepts from higher ed to high school, to elementary school, to kindergarten and preschool now. So I've seen this develop over the years, and the reason it's important for you to understand is this was not a problem that started 4 years ago. This was not a problem that started after George Floyd was killed. This has been going on for at least an entire generation, maybe more. It's just that the springboard was provided to push this all out. And the reason I say that it's a fight for our national survival is that if you look at how these issues are presented in schools with regard to critical race theory, and they'll argue with you, oh, that's not really critical race theory. That's a legal concept taught only in law schools. I'm sorry. If they are teaching children that your destiny in this country is dependent on the color of your skin, if they are teaching students to view themselves as having a skin color rather than being a full citizen, if they are doing those things, if they are putting privileged wheels, if they are doing those things, they're teaching the concepts of critical race theory. You will never see a 3rd or 4th or 5th grade book called Introduction to Critical Race Theory. That's not how it works, okay? And the reason it is so important, and the reason it's a matter of national survival, is that these tools are used to turn students against each other, to turn students against their society, to turn students against their country, and to turn students, and this is particularly true with the radical gender theory, against their parents. So this is really a matter of survival. A teacher that we've highlighted on the website really for about almost a year and a half now is a middle school teacher in Providence who came forward on our website to tell her story about the new curriculum that was put into middle school in Providence. She is a white teacher, blonde hair, blue-eyed, Germanic background. The student population is almost 100% non-white, but she, for 20 years, had a great relationship with them, never a problem. Until about 2 years ago, they brought in an entirely new curriculum, entirely new books, books even by great African-American authors like Maya Angelou were literally pulled off the shelves and thrown into dumpsters. And instead, they brought in this curriculum of pamphlets for the students to read. And every pamphlet had an oppressor versus oppressed narrative, and always in racial terms. And she witnessed how this turned the students around, because this is what they were reading, and how it created student hostility towards her, to the extent that they started to call her America. You're America because you're white. We are not America. Because for a year, all they'd been reading, the entirety of the history of the United States, was oppression. Nothing good ever happened in this country, except there was oppression. And so she went public with that. And that is a good example of how it's a fight for national survival, because it's taking the most sensitive and troubling issue in the history of the country, one that for half a century people have worked really hard to improve, and it is like ripping open the wound, and not for any good purpose, but to tear down society. It's not about justice, it's about power, and that's what's happening. So this was my history watching this, and so one of the messages I want to tell you is that you have to be in this for the long term. There are battles that need to be fought this election cycle, and next election cycle, and everything in between. But this is not a 2-year-old problem. It is not going to go away in 2 years. You need to be committed, and I love the fact that people have shown up and that you show an interest in your children's education, in the community, the health of the community, because schools are part of the community, and you have every right to do that. And so what I like to do is to view myself as sounding the siren, sounding the warning alarm, and that's where we are now. There are a lot of things that you can do. One of them is to do the sort of organizing you're doing, to fight the public relations battle, to fight for school board seats. Because if you do not replace the people who are in those positions of power, nothing is going to change. And as we do this, so criticalrace.org is essentially a database. It's the most comprehensive database of critical race theory in all its variations in higher education. We've documented over 500 schools. We've documented elite K through 12, the expensive private schools that the future leaders of the country go to. And it's worse there in private school than it is actually in public school. We've also documented medical schools. And the most shocking thing is, as bad as it is in higher ed, and as bad as it is in K through 12, it's worse in medical schools. And if you do any reading, National Association of Scholars has done great work documenting that. Medical schools are going down the tube because of the CRT ideology. Everything is about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is just code word for critical race theory. And we've also done the military academies. The good news is the military academies are not as bad as the rest of higher ed. The bad news is that CRT does have a foothold there. So we have looked at this, and one thing that is absolutely astounding to us is how far it has spread, how deep it has spread, and how much money is behind it. You all see this, okay, in your daily activism. The money, if you just read the New York Times, you'd think, all the money, all this dark money flowing to right-wing groups, okay? Not true, okay? It's in the billions and billions a year are flowing to the consultants who do the CRT stuff, the universities for their programs, the DEI departments. You add it up, it is probably at least in the multi-billions a year, maybe in the tens of billions a year. Perfect example is, so we have our map, our CRT website is a database, but it's also an interactive map. You can hover over it, you can click on your state, then you can click on the schools in your state. UCLA Law School created their own map to map anti-CRT activities. Okay? They have all the money in the world. They have the entire UCLA system behind them. They're able to use UCLA staff. They got a $400,000 grant from something called the Lumina Foundation. They have more resources and money than they know what to do with, as opposed to us. Okay? And that's just a good example of how all the money is on that side. I saw a figure in various quote-unquote legitimate publications, mainstream media publications, that after George Floyd's death, 50 billion with a B, not with an M, were pledged to by corporations and foundations to various what they would call racial justice activities. Not all of, some of them are very worthy, but a lot of them are the CRT sort of things that are taking place. So that's where all the money is. So you have to do what you can do. You know your neighbors. You know people in the school. The consultant doesn't. Okay, and so what you're doing is extremely, extremely important. And there has been a lot of progress made in the last 2 years. CRT is now a toxic term. They run from that term like it's the plague. Okay, and so we have accomplished that. We have in many ways won the public relations battle, but you need to keep it up. You need to keep focusing on that. You also need to try to replace the systems. They like to say systemic racism. Well, there's systemic CRT through everywhere, and you need to replace those systems and those personnel, and you need to keep pushing and not give up. And don't let them bully you by calling you names, okay? Don't let them try to intimidate you. Keep doing what you're doing, because it really is what you are doing, a fight for our national survival. We're at a point where I like to call it an inflection point, where we've in many ways won the public relations battle, but now we have to move towards winning the battle on the ground, winning the battle for school boards, winning the battles for curriculum, and you can't give up. And so you applauded me when I walked up here, but I applaud you because you're really doing the hard work. You're fighting the battles on the ground, and I just encourage you to keep it up. Thank you.
Some schools have not. What do you say to Bronxville Public School?
Well, that unfortunately is a trend that is taking place in university, higher ed as well. Cornell requires DEI statements for all new hires and promotions.
What is this?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you have to show what you have done to, and they have different standards that you have to show. So when you say they're doing a DEI statement, is that for the district, or they're requiring teachers and students?
For the district to put on their website that they stand with these concepts.
Yeah, well, I think that there should be no governmental ideology. Okay, what that is an infringement on the free speech rights of others, because they are announcing that there's only one acceptable viewpoint. And everybody would say, well, what's wrong with diversity, equity, inclusion? At one level, nothing wrong with it. But it is an ideological approach which says we view progress in society based on racial group characteristics as opposed to individual characteristics. And so it is a group identity politics ideology that they are adopting, as opposed to saying we are going to strive as a district to make sure every individual student is treated as an individual without regard to race, ethnicity, religion, or anything else. But those TI statements typically are focused on groups and group identification. It's an ideology that they are adopting.
What can we do about it? Is my question. We spoke up at the school board meeting. We said, she's a racist.
Yeah.
You hired her. And they said, well, we didn't read the book, but then we put out the book. Like, this is who she is. So now they're saying is, okay, well, she has freedom of speech. Okay, she has freedom of speech. She could say whatever she wants, but we don't want her as, because she actually wrote it, we have to teach and train our teachers through the lens of this, whatever whiteness she was saying,
Yeah.
the anti-whiteness. So the question, what can we do about this? They are like, okay, we don't care.
Yeah.
That's
Well, I
basically
mean,
what they said.
These are all very tough situations, and I wish I had the magic answer. One is to call attention to it. One is to make a difference at the voting booth, that these are school board members, and you have to get your people on there. And that's my point, that until you replace people, they're going to continue doing this. But until that happens, this is all you can do. And this is one of the problems. I talked about billions of dollars coming from foundations and corporations. That doesn't include the money school districts and government spends itself. Taxpayers are paying for that. And so I think you've got to keep up the public relations campaign. And you've got to watch what she's doing. She does have freedom of speech, but the freedom of speech for teachers within the school is not as broad as it is when they're on their own time outside. And so you do have a right to make sure that her racist ideology is not making its way into the district. So if she's a racist, writing this nonsense outside, she's probably entitled to do that. But you've got to monitor what she's doing. And so you have to do what various people have been successful at doing, which is getting the materials that are used in the schools, getting the materials that are handed out, and then making a big deal about it the second she crosses the line from her outside personal opinion to teaching that within the school district. So there's no easy answer except keeping up the pressure.
May I make a comment to that? Sorry to interject.
Sure.
It's a violation of Title VI of the federal laws. It's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. And there are things you can do about it. We can talk about that later. But absolutely, the public pressure is important. But there are things you can do about it. Okay? We'll talk about that later.
All right. So where do we get the support, specifically from our Republican Party?
Yeah, let me just answer that. I think it's very tough in blue states where the government is against you. And that's the reality in New York State. I was just speaking to somebody a little earlier about the difference between Rhode Island and New York. So I split the year between Rhode Island and New York. And Rhode Island is more of a more traditional, not to say there aren't progressives there are, but it's more of a traditional blue-collar Democrat party. New York is a very nasty place, okay? It is out of control, okay? What goes on in state government and local governments in New York and a handful of other blue states. So that's why so many people vote with their feet. But yeah, it's tough, and I don't know enough about the politics of the GOP in New York, whether they even have those sort of resources. But somebody should be giving support to the parents who are doing bake sales to try to raise money, whereas the union is all in for this stuff. And it's very disproportionate, let's put it that way, the resources that are available. But I think it's something, if this is a successful election, that the New York State GOP needs to focus on, giving support to people, to parents on the ground.
May I speak to that briefly? There's something called, I believe it's the 1776 PAC, come to me afterwards, not the exact name, run by a man named Brian Bierdesky. It's him setting up his own PAC to support school board races in particular. He's not the only one doing this. The most successful ones have been focused PACs in, I believe, Texas and Florida. They also had to start up independent of the Republican Party. Again, talk to me afterwards, but you should be getting in touch with the people who have been setting up PACs in Texas and Florida to learn how to do your own state PAC. to support precisely school board members and their races.
I mean, though that PAC has been very successful, particularly in Florida, but it's a different territory when you're in a red state than when you're in New York, okay? Because the government is not actively hostile to you. So they were very successful in Florida, flipping some school board seats this year. I think they flipped 50 of them, including in blue counties. But I understand that you are coming up against an attorney general's office which is hostile to you, an attorney general who is hostile to you and willing to use the power that she has against you. And it's a very difficult, I think it's very different in New York State than it is in Florida or Texas or any of the reddish states. That doesn't mean you should give up. I don't know if those PACs are now focused on deep blue states yet, but it's worth looking into. 1776 PAC, I think is what it's called.
So my question to you is, the history, and this is from Charlotte Isabet, is that this kind of control over our national education in the public schools came from the Department of Education in Washington. Is that really something we should also be aware of? Because all of these curriculums, where are they coming from?
Well, I think change at the federal level is needed. There were some good first steps made during the prior administration, but they weren't very organized. And part of that is just the political process. When a Democrat president comes into office, there are hundreds of people lined up who've been waiting to fill bureaucratic spots in all these agencies. And those are the people who push the policy. When a Republican president comes in, they have to scrounge for people. They might be able to fill the top levels, but everybody below them is still holdovers. And so the federal level is a problem, but ultimately individual curriculums are decided at the state and local level. Again, New York State's a little tough, but there's been great progress made in other states to use state power to reform state-run schools, and I think that's appropriate.
Well, thank you very much. And so, Bill, thank you for coming.
Okay,
3
thank you.
hours. I will introduce our panel one, Public School Curricula. Our first panelist is David Randall, and he will speak on why a civics approach to education reform is essential. Thank you, David.
Thank you all so much, and thank you to everyone. Thank you particularly Linda Killian, David Randall, Director of Research at the National Association of Scholars and Executive Director of the Civics Alliance. The title is basically a way to cover what do we do and why are we doing it. And I'm going to talk about that in general, but then also concentrate on our latest release, a model education licensure code, which is about reforming education schools and the education teacher licensure process. What are we doing and why? We are trying to reform, restore, recapture the education system from this progressive takeover, which is converting it into nothing but radical ideology. National Association of Scholars started doing this since 1987, focusing on higher education reform. We have moved from just internal reform to policy recommendations to the federal government, the state government, about how to reform higher education from outside by legislation. National Association of Scholars then convened the Civics Alliance, or group of organizations, to focus on, above all, K-12 civics education. So we are adding, in effect, part of K-12 policy to the portfolio of reform. What are we trying to do? To rally public opinion, to inform policymakers, public opinion policy tanks, to let them know what the problem is and to give them legislative solutions and administrative solutions, how do you fix the problem? It's not enough simply to say there is a problem. You have to provide the solutions to do this. And providing the solutions is also a way of galvanizing public opinion, giving them something to shoot for. And, and go for the whole loaf, take the half loaf as needed. The problem is, it was said very eloquently by Mr. Jacobson, I would add to the critical race theory action civics, which is taking over civics education and using it as community organization, vocational training for progressive activism. The education public tax dollar is being used to create a network of progressive activists on the public dime, and and an easily organizable rent-a-mob for everything, not least for pressuring the government to provide ever more money, but also to use education school time to press for progressive policy results, and to make that be the purpose of education. It's an enormously complex problem because every bureaucracy has been taken over interlockingly and all their money. What we are proposing is giving the information, the tools to, well, you first, the citizens, grassroots activists, policy institutes, policymakers, who frankly are not prepared to deal with this. There's 30 years or more of revolution, and there haven't been any legislative solutions, or darn few even come up with. Providing the legislative solutions to other institutes is, frankly, an absolutely essential part of what's going on, to the institutes, to the public, to the policymakers. You have to work on multiple levels. State level is the hinge, but federal policy, you need to oppose bills like the Civic Secures Democracy Act, which will hardwire CRT and action civics into the federal money strings. Once you've done that, every state agency is going to do that just for the money. So you have to oppose that. You have to try to work to get control of the Department of Education if you can, to at least stop the wheels from turning somewhat, and ideally reform. That is difficult. You need to work to retake the school districts, where you need to do that on your own. You need to get better curriculum in. You need to not just let the administrators say, oh, defer to expert opinion. No, you have to say, I have the power to get rid of all this horrible stuff, which you do if you have your majority of the school district school board. There are legislative things which help, like laws to move the school board election date to the general election date. So it's not just the cousins of the union members showing up to vote in a 7% turnout. Also, make it possible, have a law that makes party identification be there for every school board election. It's a very good information signal. And finally, you need to change the agendas to make it possible to introduce new business, not be told, oh, I'm sorry, we can't even discuss this. So you need the state level for that too. Above all, you need to address the state because it's the hinge. That's where most of the money and regulations come. When the local district can say, oh, sorry, it's the state which is responsible, the state can put some crucial interruptions in what the federal government is trying to do. What power there is via the state legislature and the state government, governors, administrations. That is where I would place my bets on trying to start the counter-revolution. Now, what do we do in particular? We've got a great deal of model legislation hinged for the states, making the curriculum be better, having academic transparency, financial transparency, having legislative review of standards, a whole bunch of things. And there are a number of handouts there, one of which is all the web links on our fine NAS and Civics Alliance web pages. Also something we've just done joint with the America First Policy Institute. They in fact endorsed 10 of our model legislations. Here we have a fact sheet, there's also the full thing. Take a look there to see what's the sort of thing which is a good priority. This is all working jointly at every level, higher education, K-12, and now we've just introduced a model education licensure code. And I want to go into that in a little bit of detail because nobody has really addressed the education schools in particular. Education reform is going to be a dead letter so long as every principal and every teacher is sabotaging the laws on the books, so long as they're convinced that what needs to be done is revolution in the classroom. And there's a difficulty in getting any reform when you have people in the classroom who are working to make it a dead letter. You have this body of revolutionary teachers because of the deep politicization and corruption of the education schools for generations, and now even formally it's beginning, particularly in Minnesota and Illinois, the politicization of the licensure process itself. You know, to become a teacher, you're not just having to go through the propaganda mills of the education schools, it's being made part of the licensure requirement. We therefore now have 3 model bills, just released, gosh, is it just this last week, which are meant to work together to provide a hinge for the public, for policymakers to prevent this from happening. First off, the Education Licensure Non-Discrimination Act. You are forbidden from inculcating the elements of critical race theory, gender fluidity, using service learning. In fact, everything which is not free discussion, we explicitly protect free discussion of concepts, but the inculcation, the requirement that you have to practice these politicized concepts. So, forbidden in education licensure, forbidden in the professional development materials, forbidden in any education school which acts as, is licensed as a teacher preparation program. You can actually get at the education schools by threatening to de-recognize them as teacher preparation programs. So they have to certify that they are not inculcating their teachers with this horrendous ideology. And if and when this gets passed, it's not going to be a solution in itself. Obviously, the education schools would try to make it a dead letter and teach what they want to teach anyway. But it gives you the ability to begin to reform, as opposed to having no legal redress at all. Second one, Education Licensure Review Act. Basically, it means that you can't get teachers' certification in if there is a veto from the legislature and the governor. It means that the education administration can't just operate an autopilot and impose whatever. The legislature has a look in, and this, at the very least, the threat of this ought to keep things from getting too bad. And if it's actually they're continuing to plow ahead, if you've got the legislature and the governor with you, you can at least hold up the autopilot. Finally, alternative certification. How to become a teacher without having to go through ed school or even get a BA. A number of states have done this already to some extent. They still require you to get a BA, but the point is, so long as you have to go to education school, so long as you have to get a BA, they're going to force you to take endless propaganda courses. Anytime there's an education barrier, the progressives, the radicals, use that as a way to force you to be propagandized, to make sure that nobody who's interested will even bother, and by the way, to make it far more expensive. You have to spend endless thousands of tuition dollars for generally empty or counterproductive courses. We're saying all you need to do to become a teacher, 8 courses, 6 of them in the subject matter, and only 2 in education school pedagogy. That means you actually have to take history. All right, I see that if you're going to teach social studies, not endless blither about the latest theory from the education school. Okay, I hear that I'm up to about 10 minutes. The point is, we've got endless other stuff, but this is the sort of thing we're doing, and if you want to retake these schools, you absolutely have to control the education school. Not control. You have to free the education schools and the licensure process from this radical tyranny. Thank you.
How would any of these things actually happen?
It's an uphill battle. No, but it's fascinating. So I've talked to somebody I'll keep this. In a blue state who works for a local policy institute, having these policies available matters because you can talk to people who are moderate and wavering, and there are people who are, and you can at the very least use them to slow down the revolution. Now, you're still building up, and it is an uphill struggle in New York, and I live in Brooklyn, New York, so trust me, I am aware of the uphill-ness of this. It gives you something to build on and to talk to your friends and neighbors about. The way I think of it is, New York is a 1.5 party state, as many are. It's going to be not single party dominance always. There will from time to time be a coalition of reformers, effectively, here, Republicans, independents, some moderate liberals. If you can get a coalition in, ideally into the governor's office, there will be compromises. It won't be perfect for education reform, but if you have this stuff ready, you can make that be available for an incoming governor's administration, say, make this part of your policy agenda. So we live in a 1.5 party state, but the half party does win from time to time.
I'm actually a New Jersey guy, and in New Jersey, they did put school board elections on the same day as general elections. And with all due respect, it's a horrible idea. Because the party controls the elections in these blue states. And they get their voters out, and those voters know exactly who to vote for. If you have the great benefit of having a separate election, and if it's nonpartisan especially, you all know who you are. You can get the people out to vote. Very few people vote in these elections.
Right.
You just got to get your voters out. You're much better off, I respectfully disagree, with a non-partisan, off general election. New Jersey is terrible. You cannot win because the party controls the ballot box. That's my point.
Okay, all right, we're going to move along to our next speaker we're doing pretty good, Michael Kane, My Kids, My Body, My Choice, Defending Bodily Autonomy and Parental Rights. And so please understand if you would keep your questions within, that context, so.
Thank you very much. Hey, everybody, my name is Michael Kane. I am founder of a group called Teachers for Choice. You can check us out at teachersforchoice.org. I want to thank Bonnie. Thank you so much for bringing me up to be here today. Absolutely love Bonnie. We've been battling for almost a year to try to have the right to this crazy idea that I control what goes in my body and what goes in my kid's body as well too. So I love the signs in back. Let's make sure they go, get them out there, Women for Zeldin, I have a Democrats for Zeldin in the back of my car. I have never in my life voted for a Republican, and that changes this year. I'm voting for Lee Zeldin. We exist. There's a lot of us. I voted for numerous different parties before, but never a Republican. We need balance. I'm convinced of that. And there's a lot of people out there like me. There's a lot of people that are going to go and vote for Zeldin and not tell you. But what they need is to see it's okay. When you have these conversations, talk to people, even if it's uncomfortable, you have to do it because it's a popularity contest. At the end of the day, people need to feel like, okay, it's okay that I do this, Anyway, where this battle really started for me was actually in 2018. At that time, there was an alleged measles outbreak in New York. It turns out it was really basically fake. I'm not going to get into all the details of that. But what they did was they got rid of the religious exemption to vaccination for children to attend school, which existed in the state for almost 55 years. It currently exists in 45 states in America. It's not some wacky, crazy idea. When that happened, I was paying very close attention to Albany, and geniuses like Jeff Dinowitz were talking in their offices about adult vaccine mandates and teachers. So I put up a petition in July of 2019 called New York Educators Against Vaccine Mandates. And people said to me then, but Mike, what vaccine are they going to force on us? My teachers, my colleagues. We didn't know it was the one that didn't exist. That was 6 months before COVID, but I knew it was coming because we were paying attention. Very interesting how those things unfolded. So right away, I was battling this because I was prepared early. And the biggest signal for me was when my union said, you're going to get fired if you don't test, if you don't COVID test. We ended up suing over that, not over the testing, but I asked, what happens to my specimen when I hand it over? Mike Mulgrew, the head of my union, the worst mayor in New York City history, de Blasio, didn't respond to me. Crickets. So we sued. An attorney named Michael Sussman helped me sue, and we won a stipulation to that testing requirement that they must dispose of our samples immediately finding a COVID positive or negative result. Fast forward 9 months later, the sheriff in Los Angeles comes out and says, I was just briefed by the FBI in an emergency private session that I have to get rid of my COVID testing company because they have links to the Chinese government and they might be data banking the DNA. That company was Fulgent Genetics, the same company de Blasio contracted in New York City that we sued over. So we were right about that. There's so many layers to this thing, so many things you don't even think about what's happening. We knew the vaccine mandate was coming. We protested against it, we organized against it. We got thousands of people in the streets of New York City. Bobby Ann and I and others that we worked with, we got almost 4,000 people in Albany in January protesting against vaccine mandates and what was coming. This was an issue that resonated beyond party. It resonated in a major way. For some reason, when they went after the kids in 2019 to take away their rights, it just didn't have the force. But when they went after the adults, there was something about it that it really has sparked a movement. And to where myself, I'm voting Republican for the first time, and there's a lot of us out there in New York State right now. So and in the beginning, a lot of the teachers in my school in New York City, I was a special ed teacher for 14 years in New York City, were happy that I was fired. The dirty, unvaccinated teacher, good, he's gone. But then, a year later, getting together fired firefighters, healthcare workers, teachers, sanitation workers, we crashed the Labor Day parade. And we marched, and we went up 47th Street, right through the teachers union, right where Randy Weingarten was, head of the National Teachers Union, and we chanted, "End all mandates, let us work." And all the teachers cheered, all right? These are UFT, Deep Blue Union members, they all cheered for us. Randy Weingarten ended up coming on my podcast about 2 weeks later because of it, because it's major damage control. And she said, okay, well, since the mayor has now said the private sector doesn't have to have a vaccine mandate, then it shouldn't apply to the public sector either. She had to come on my teeny tiny podcast to say that, because things are moving. Things are changing now. It absolutely is happening. And I also left my union. I was a progressive unionist. I lobbied Albany 5 years. The straight union agenda, whatever their bullet points were, that's what I was doing. I was a delegate in my school. But at the end, when the union sold me out, I left the union. I encourage people to leave the teachers union now, and I push that out there because their agenda isn't even to protect the workers who pay their salaries. That's not even what they're looking to do. They become so big, they become this behemoth, they have more money than some countries. They don't even care about those who are paying their own salaries now. So in a way, I'm politically homeless in a lot of ways, you know? But here I am because I know that what's important is forging these new alliances, speaking to people who can hear, finding the independents, finding the moderates, finding the disenchanted Democrats. There's a lot of them out there, even in New York. New York is not as blue as they try to make it seem. It's not. And I think that this year there is a really good chance that we could really move things, really change things. One thing that I am concerned about that's not really coming up much is the potential for new technologies in school system. In Britain, there's a school where to get your lunch, the children have to have their faces scanned. These are the next things that I'm worried about, and I'm worried about coming. tracking systems. I spoke to a woman in Hawaii. Her child in a private school had to wear a tracking device around her neck during the entire COVID situation. Her child had a religious exemption to the COVID vaccine mandate they had, but she said there's no exemption process for this. They have to wear them like animals. Retina scans, all of these types of things I'm very concerned about. In terms of the school boards, and in terms of the fight, I do come from a left workers, progressive background, you know? And one thing I want to say is when you show up at these school board meetings, when your voices are heard, when you're pushing back and when you're fighting, make sure that your narrative is on point. My suggestion, don't use the word groomer. Don't, even if it's true, even if it's correct about somebody, don't go there. Be passionate and strong, not angry. They love when you're angry. They love if they can, right? What do they do with that? How do they portray you and what do they do to try to stop a concerned parent from looking like a concerned parent? So that's just some of the things that I think are important. I think it is important to just think about how are they going to spin it? How are they going to come after you? What are they going to do to try to defeat you? Again, my name's Michael Kane. You can check out our stuff at teachersforchoice.org, teachersforchoice.org, and thank you so much.
I watched your interview with Randy Weingart. Did anything transpire after that with her?
There's a lot she lied about and got wrong on science, but I didn't care about that because who cares what she thinks about science? We wanted to nail her down on labor issues, right? So some of the biggest things were that she's open to rehiring fired New York City workers with back pay. She says it's unfair for there to be no mandate in the private sector, but still have one in the public sector. And also what was important for me was that she had said she'll do it again. She said, I stand by what we did and we'll do it again. That's going to be a very important message in the future when we come back with what's going to happen when we have to organize workers against and say, don't believe them, don't think they represent you. And we're still in touch, and I greatly respect she came on my show. I mean, that took some courage for Mike Mulgrew, who heads the New York City Union, still crickets. He won't come near it, he won't do it. So I respect that she came on despite all of our differences, and I hope she'll come on again when there's more issues. What's that?
But is there anything that is so egregious that we can get some of these radical activist teachers or administrators out of our district?
I'm not sure. I think actually there's other people on the panel that are going to have more of a focus and do a better job on answering that. So bring that question back again. But what I will say is I think the purging of people like me who said, no, I don't want to take this shot. No, I want to wait till there's more science. No, I have sincerely held religious beliefs against it. I think that was a part of this in the reverse. They wanted to get rid of the critical thinkers. They wanted to get rid of the people that teach kids how to think and not teaching them what to think. So I think there is definitely a big piece of that in this as well too.
Why shouldn't, if police officers have to have cameras on their bodies, why can't they have the camera in their class? So every parent can go in at any time. It is theirs, it is ours, it's taxpayers. I think something like that would be a very usable tool.
Good luck with the teachers union.
But they already broke it when they did it all on Zoom. They have no precedent like they would in the past.
I hear you. I think it's a good thing to push, but one thing that I'll say, overall, especially in New York City, this trend to push parents physically out of the schools is frightening. If you're not vaccinated as a parent, you can't step foot in the school. Back to school nights, all on Zoom, all from the union, all because the union is pushing that and is pushing parents out of the schools. It's very scary. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because that's how you do it. You have to find a way.
Absolutely. No, I agree. There needs to be pushback for sure.
So what's it going to take for teachers to say enough?
It's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot because thousands of teachers in New York City lost their jobs over the vaccine mandates, and it was still hard to get people coming together. But in specific on what I'm dealing with the mandates, the fact that Randy Weingarten had to come and speak to me publicly and be on my show is a sign that she's afraid of my contingent, of the thousands of teachers and tens of thousands throughout New York State, because they didn't do that to the teachers throughout New York State. It was only in the city where they got that psychotic stuff going on. But hopefully I'm fired right now. I mean, hopefully they're trying to take away my license as well too, because I'm fired and suing in court. We're continuing in court. So hopefully when we're reinstated, we have plans for what to do. There needs to be a counter to the teachers union. We have some plans, but we need to get reinstated first, and we're fighting in court right now.
Hi, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the vast amount of money in the teachers union of New York, this is New York City, right? What are the sources of that money?
Oh, to my knowledge, it's union dues. I mean, I pay like $1,400 a year in union dues. I mean, I used to, I don't anymore. I quit and they still took my money. You gotta like sue them to get your money, so it's like insane. But $14.50 in union dues, 200,000 members in New York City, and that's just New York City alone. Are there other sources of funds? I haven't heard of that, but just from the members alone, it's immense.
Just to follow up, I'm sorry, Michael, is it mandatory that you be a member? I'm sorry.
No, it's not. The Janus case, Supreme Court case, made it not, but they give you a 2-week window to leave, and if you don't leave in that 2 weeks, they say you got to do it next year. So it's a game, but there's organizations who help you with that if you get caught up in that game.
One of the crucial things is whether the union dues are automatically taken or whether it's voluntary. In Wisconsin, Governor Scott Walker kneecapped the teachers' unions by making the union dues be voluntary, at which point they fell dramatically, and so did the teacher union budget. It's the nuclear option.
And in New York City, the city colludes with the unions, make it as impossible as possible.
And also, don't they yield something from their pension funds?
I'm not.
Maybe not at this point.
I'm actually not sure.
Anymore.
So rather than leave the union, I felt like it was time to join the union.
No, and try to take over.
That, right, because we had about 500 people in just Yonkers that were teachers that were against the mandates and against.
So no, that's a good question.
So is it better to leave it?
It
or
depends.
take it over?
So it depends on where you are. You had that ability. You have 200,000 members plus retirees in New York City. They own a gigantic building downtown. They have money more than most small countries. Me personally, I do not believe the UFT and the AFT are reformable. I don't. So, and I've talked a lot to labor leaders and a lot of stuff. I believe we need something separate. Your union that seems a little smaller and you have more support, different strategies for different places.
And thank you for everything that you're doing.
Oh, quick one. Okay, good. Very quick.
I'm a sanitation worker, and I never really paid attention to this. It's a little embarrassing, but I just found out that my union dues are supporting the campaign of Hochul, and actually also somehow supported the presidential election. Like, what besides quitting? I mean, what can I do about it?
So one thing that they have is usually they have a separate fund. They call it COPE for teachers that go to political campaigns. Make sure you're not giving to that. The other thing, go to frontlineworkers.org. Frontlineworkers.org. They're doing where they're actually having cheap membership where you get to vote for who you want to endorse, and they're for firefighters, sanitation, EMS, police. They're then giving out their endorsement, and they're trying to come out with a count. Because the New York City firefighters endorsed Hochul too. Every firefighter I know was like, are you kidding me? Like, how did that just happen? So yeah, go to frontlineworkers.org, start to build with them, because we need to build these counter organizations to have our voices heard.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, we could have a whole session just on the unions. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
you.
Michael. Our panel 2, we will now begin, is from the health aspect, how closures and curricula affect children's health. And our first speaker at this panel is Frank Murtha, as you see on your sheet. And Frank, thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you. Can everybody hear me all right?
Would you like to pass?
Yes, I would. I was hoping you'd say that. Thank you. Well, first of all, let me just thank the Putnam County Republican Women's Club as well as the Republican Women of Westchester. I certainly appreciate your taking the time to sponsor this very valuable forum, and thank you to everyone who's showing up here and taking part in our democracy and making sure your questions get asked and answered. I don't know if I'm going to need the top 10 minutes. My topic here is about the psychological and mental health effects of CRT and related ideas in curriculum, because they are having a negative effect on our children. But first, just a little bit about me. I am running for state senate in District 37. Now, if we had a forum like this last year at this time, I never would have thought I was going to do that. But a lot of things happened, and what really got me off the bench and into the game was seeing what's happening with my children's schools. Now, my background is in psychology. It's not in politics. I have a specialization from Boston College in working with children and adolescents. So this is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. It's something I can speak to, and I think it's, frankly, it's not getting enough attention. So, basically, I am running for a number of issues, but I call it giving parents a voice and a choice when it comes to their education. And that's something that's really important to me. The voice being having some input, being able to get your voice heard and have your desires acted upon. I mean, let's face it, I'm a taxpayer, I got 2 kids, I'm a single dad with 2 kids. We're the biggest stakeholders here, and we're the ones paying for everything. So we need to be in that room and we need to be heard. And the other is having a choice. And that has to do with health decisions, masks, mandates, things of that nature, as well as greater transparency. So that's where I'm coming from, that's why I'm running. You know, did this thing work?
Sorry.
Am I good like this?
No.
I'm not. I'm half Italian. I think I could get it out there.
You need to be full time.
I gotta be full time. Thanks so much. I appreciate that. Look, folks, we've heard people talk about a mental health crisis that our children are going through. It's a good word to describe it. It has gotten worse. Incidents of self-harm in children, men and women, have roughly doubled from 2009 through 2019, and things have gotten worse under COVID, of course. It's not your imaginations. I mean, there's higher reported incidences of depression, anxiety, all of these things. Self-harm is going up. Suicide, every parent's nightmare, is going up. And, you know, let's face it, our kids, more so than ever, they're just so socially isolated. I got 2, I got 13 and 10, they're always on their screens. When we were younger, I don't want to sound like back in my day, but let's face it, kids got to interact a lot more, and it helped their social development, their emotional development, and their academic development. And frankly, we've taken that away from our kids. So where does CRT enter into this? Well, first of all, let's talk about what CRT is not. There is a bit of a canard out there that somehow, if you don't think that CRT curricula is good, it's because you don't want to teach the history of our country. I don't hear anybody saying we shouldn't be teaching the complete history of our country, warts and all, because we're supposed to be able to learn from these things. My children happen to be half Asian. I did a talk recently with the OCA, they're an Asian Pacific Islander organization. I told them, because I heard some things from them. I said, look, my kid did an entire report on being a Chinese immigrant, going through San Francisco. What was the experience? So all of these things are being taught. What they're not being taught is the right and proper context around them. Part of the problem is what we call CRT, and it's a bit of a semantic shell game that gets played with this. CRT, critical race theory, comes from Marxist critical theory. It's an academic discipline, but basically what it has done is oozed its way into the ground, kind of like radon, and made the educational curriculum radioactive all through the school systems. What CRT does, which is so destructive, and it hurts kids' mental health, is it does a few basic things that are bad. It starts by concentrating on what makes people different. Then it groups people into separate groups based on those differences. Then it assigns blame and grievance and labels one oppressive versus the other. I mean, that's the height of Marxism. That's where it comes from. And then it prescribes different ways of treating these different groups of people based on these principles. I would simply suggest to you, can you think of any of the great evils that humankind has ever perpetrated that did not start from a framework of, those people are different than us. We need to treat them differently based on that and put our grievances into action and discriminate. It's a bad and destructive framework for approaching this. It also has effects. So for starters, I mean, we're teaching, and by the way, you may notice, I'm making a point of not using inflammatory language. I like what Michael said. I think you can get a lot farther if you try and find common ground and focus on the principles at play rather than throwing rhetorical bombs. But one of the problems is it takes away kids' agency. It takes away their sense of empowerment. You're literally teaching them to be victims. All right? Who's familiar with the author Ta-Nehisi Coates? Raise your hand if you're familiar with the work of Ta-Nehisi Coates. Okay. Well, I don't think very much of it, but he is an anti-racist CRT author. Merely by having black children read a passage from his book, their reported self-agency and empowerment dropped on 3 major questions. One of them was, if I set my mind to it, I can accomplish my goals. It didn't take long, 1 paragraph, and they already dropped by 15% on that question. Another one was, it is my responsibility to put my talents to use. That dropped significantly as well. And then, there was one other, it was, no matter how hard I try, I never get credit for what I do. Can you imagine intentionally introducing content to children that encourage them to think this way? It's destructive. For some people, it may come from a good place, but it is not having the intended effect. Another thing is we are intentionally making our children hypersensitive with CRT curriculum. Has anybody here ever heard of the Baader-Meinhof syndrome? Phenomenon, I should say? We got a nodding head, okay. I didn't know it was called that for a long time. It's the scenario, I'll give you a quick example of Baader-Meinhof, right? I bought this really cool hat. It was like an Irish skimmer cap, and I really liked it a lot. And I bought it, and I put it on. I was walking around New York City, and then all of a sudden I noticed, hey, that guy's wearing the same hat. Oh, so is that guy. I'm like, what's going on? Everybody's wearing the same hat. I said, hey, when did everybody start wearing my hat? And somebody said, Frank, people have been wearing that hat for 10 years. You never noticed before. Why did I notice? Because suddenly it was on my radar. I was thinking, I was conscious of it. When you direct people's attention to a phenomenon, they are going to see it everywhere. Okay? Talk about intentionally increasing our hypersensitivity. There's something called a microaggression. And people are being taught to seek out the fact that they are experiencing tiny aggression, which is a complete misnomer because aggression implies intent by nature, and none of these things are intentional. They're just minor slights. Okay, so when you are already taking children and making them focus on they're going to see it everywhere, and we're training our kids to do that. That does not make for psychologically healthy kids and proper development, certainly not socially. Anxiety and control. Here's a question for you. Have you ever been told by somebody, hey, don't worry about things you can't control? Nodding heads. We've all heard. That's one of the most common pieces of advice. One of the things about it is this, though. It's a catch-22. One of the reasons that never actually works is the only thing we ever worry or are anxious about are things we can't control. Because if we could dictate the outcomes, and we wouldn't have to worry in the first place, right? What CRT curriculum does is it takes away kids' sense of their self-control, their ability to control their own destiny. If anxiety were a poison, the antidote would be a sense of self-control. And we're intentionally taking that away from kids. We are making them more anxious. Another area, and this is such a third rail, but I'm going to touch it because, I don't know, maybe I'm made of wood. I don't feel like I'm going to get electrocuted if I touch it. And also it needs to be said, what we are doing with transgenderism with kids is harmful. I've actually attended a talk on this subject. I respected where the people were coming from. They were trying to do best by their children. But there are problems with this, and there is a better way. All right? Let's start with the common ground. It's a great place to start, and as somebody who wants to build bridges here, I think we can all agree on some things for our kids, whether you're for transgenderism or not. One is all kids deserve to be healthy and happy. Yes, we all agree. Everybody agrees on that. All children deserve to be treated with kindness and dignity. Yes, everybody agrees on that. Bullying should not be tolerated. We agree on that. Here's where things get a little shaky, but I think everybody still agrees on this. There are some boys who are more traditionally feminine and some girls who are more traditionally masculine, and there's some overlap in how they express themselves, what they are interested in, and whom they're attracted to. And this is okay, right? And then lastly, children should be accepted for who they are. Now, here's the thing. There is a criticism of old-fashioned parents, like maybe like some of the ones in my family, that said this: if you caught a kid playing with a Barbie doll, a boy, I should say, pardon my sexist language, if you caught a boy playing with a Barbie doll, you would say, hey, boys don't play with Barbie dolls. That was the old method. But we've come so far with the modern transgender movement that instead of saying, hey, boys don't play with Barbie dolls, people today say, boys don't play with Barbie dolls. Oh, wait a minute. It's the same thing. It's the same message. And it comes from the same mistake. Once you understand that, hey, look, a boy can like things that are pretty. A girl can throw, mud pies. All of this is okay. You may be attracted to people who are the same sex as you. All this. Once you accept that, there's no need for any of this. This madness goes away. There's no need to change. It's okay. And the message to our children, and it's not getting through, is you're okay. You don't have to change a thing, kid. You're all right. And if there's parts of you that you don't accept, your body, and let's face it, there's a lot of different ways in which young people growing up don't accept their bodies. And it manifests itself in a lot of ways. We don't tell them that they have to bind their breasts, chemically castrate themselves, and make themselves infertile for life, turn themselves into medical patients forever. This is destructive. And I don't want to even throw stones. What I want to do is let people know there is a better way. Help people recognize and accept the things about themselves that they have trouble with. And that's the whole purpose of counseling psychology, which was my field. So I don't know why it's so difficult to say that. I guess you get called names. But I think it's always important that we go back to those 5 things we all agree on. So what's the best way? What looks more like self-acceptance? Somebody who denies their sex, or somebody who feels the need to, take gender affirmation surgery and all of these other procedures and medical interventions. I'll leave it at that, but I did want to make sure I touched that third rail. I haven't been fried yet, which is good. But we can do better by our kids, and we have to, and it's okay to say this. There is a better way, and parents need to hear it. Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
So what is your advice to parents if your child comes home and having questions about these things, or something that has been talked about in school, or your neighbor bringing it up? What is your advice on how to speak to your children?
Well, I guess it depends in part on what the particular issue is for the child. If the child is struggling with their own sexual identity, I would want to talk to them about what it is that they find scary, what it is that makes them want to change. Well, I have kind of a fun story, but I'll save that for maybe afterwards if we're having a cocktail. When it comes to other things, I think, look, it starts with some of the basic things. Everybody should be treated with kindness and dignity, but biological sex is a real thing. And what we're calling gender affirmation is sex denial. So be kind. Don't make fun, but accept that, some of this shell game people play with trying to substitute gender for sex, it's inaccurate. And if it comes to the individual, they're worried and they're going through some tough times themselves and they're not sure how they feel, talk to them and get them perhaps a therapist. But frankly, the standard of care is a group of people who have bullied every other voice out of the room. And I don't think it's the right message to send to children. Oh, so many. This issue used to be almost exclusively male. It was boys who wanted to be girls or believed they were girls. And very recently what's happened is it's shifted dramatically. Now it's mostly young girls who believe they are boys or want to be boys. I don't think that that can be explained very easily by biological changes. I think what's happening is the socialization around the subject has changed. And frankly, I'm going to say it, social media. Man, if we could go back in time, if I could go back in time, I'd probably, made a few different bets. Maybe bought Apple stock, and the other thing I would do is make sure Facebook never saw the light of day. I draw a major distinction between adults and children. Adults have the right to live their lives any way they want. It's a free country. It's supposed to be anyway. Children are a different story. And also, it's going back to what Michael said. Yeah, genital mutilation is an accurate term. I try to avoid inflammatory language and focus on the fact where we can both, hopefully we can both agree. If there's a better way that doesn't involve doing this to kids, we need to pursue it, and there is, and that's what I'm pushing for.
But do you think that this is something that the schools could do a much better job of not, maybe encouraging is not the right word, but it seems like they're going so out of their way to make the LGBT community feel welcome and feel comfortable that it's almost sending a message to the children, in my opinion, that it's preferred to be this way. So do you think there's something to be said for that? So do you think...
The fact of the matter is I want the LGBT community in the form of, I want them to feel comfortable. I do think that the schools, for starters, let's start with the basics. If you're talking about children who are younger, they don't have abstract thinking the way adults do. They have called concrete thinking. Okay, they simply don't have the capacity to draw these distinctions. If you tell, I'll give you an example. A kindergarten student documented in a podcast I was listening to recently. She was told, hey, you could become a boy. You could wake up tomorrow and you could be a boy. Tell this to a 5-year-old girl. The girl went home, she took a shower, she had her hair slicked back in the bathroom mirror, and she started shaking uncontrollably. She was completely rattled, terrified. And her mother said, honey, what's the matter? What is it? She was absolutely shocked. And she said, Mommy, I turned into a boy and I didn't want to.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, right? So let's start with things the school can do better, is give kids a longer chance where at least they can process some of these things. It starts with kindness and dignity for the children, but telling people what they have to call kids and bullying people into not being able to ask good questions, you don't have the right to do that. And,
Our next speaker is Dr. Miriam Flisser, who will discuss the medical consequences of school closures and the curricula changes.
Good afternoon. My name is Miriam Flisser, and I'm a candidate for Congress in the 16th district, so I'm hoping consider voting for me. I'm also a pediatrician, not a politician, and I am the medical director of the Bronxville School District. In addition to that, I have several other schools for which I am the medical director. So I have a lot of experience with education. And I want to start with some advice to parents. I see there are a lot of young parents in here, and I'm going to teach them. That's what I do all day, both in my school and in my office. So the first thing that I will tell you is when you are approached by a child with a problem, remember that you are the parent. That is your role. Parents should listen. Listen to the child. That's key. Number 2, parents should educate. So when the child expresses to you what the problem is, educate the child. Tell him your feelings about it. Tell her how she should question who this is involving. Don't be afraid. Educate the child. And the next question, particularly now in this unusual environment that we're in, is that you should make the decisions You are the decision maker. Remember that, Dr. Levin, as I call myself, is telling you that. You are the decision maker, nobody else. You have greater knowledge. The person you are speaking to is a child. You have greater knowledge. A person's brain develops into their 20s, and you're talking to a small child whose brain is not developed yet. And so if decisions have to be made that are irreversible, that require medications and surgery, and even changes, title changes, etc., that you make those decisions. You don't let anyone else make those decisions. Certainly not the child, and certainly not schools. Schools should never undermine the strong cultural heritage of all of our diverse communities. They should not be telling parents that it's none of their business what sex education their children receive. It is our business. We have to know everything. Now, let me teach you about a child and how a child develops. So when a child is first born, the child does not know that she is separate from you. She thinks she's part of you. And then she learns something called part-object awareness, where he learns that the doll, Binky, is not part of him. That's something else. By the way, until they know that, they can't speak. But once they know that that's a Binky and I'm me, then they can speak because they can give things names, right? So that's the first thing they learn, is part-object awareness. The second thing they learn is that they're separate from you, that this is called separation, and it leads to something which is most common at 8 months. I'm sure you've noticed it, called separation anxiety, right? This is when they start to cry in the middle of the night, when they wake up and realize you're not there. By the way, I'll give you some advice on that. If you can make them go back to sleep by patting them or comforting them and not pick them up, that won't be as big a problem. If you pick them up, you're there. I mean, that's going to be a problem. Okay, but anyway, to go back to that. So, separation anxiety around 8 months, it's the most acute. You don't know that because they seem so young to you, but I really once had a child have depression when her parents went on vacation when she was 8 months old, and she would not come out of the crib. She cried every time someone tried to take her out of the crib. I called them on vacation and said, "You come right back," because that, as Frank knows, that can have long-lasting effects, and they did return immediately. So that's separation anxiety, right? That's the next thing. All right, now we go into the Oedipal age, right? That's 3 years old, 4 years old, and this is where they first fall in love. So, who's the person handiest? There's a parent. They fall in love with their parent. Everyone goes through this. It's called the Oedipal period. One of my 4-year-olds asked me if I would marry him. And he said that he wanted to marry me when he grew up. And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't marry you. I'm already married today." and he looked at my husband, who's right back there, with kind of, I would say, he was surprised that was there, right? But believe me, when he grew up, he didn't want to marry me. So that's what happens, the Oedipal period, and you can affect that in a nice way. I do see this in dysfunctional families a lot. If the mother undermines the father and creates him as some kind of terrible character and keeps discussing what she doesn't like about him, that does affect the children. It does affect the children. And a girl at that point has got to be forming love for a male. She should be doing that. And if you show her how awful the male is, she's going to look around, for other objects. And so I think that's very important, and it goes both ways. So that is the next thing. But here's the absolute next phase, and it's the one I want to point out. The next phase is latency. That means it stops. all right? All that goes away and you start getting interested in your bicycle and playing ball and running with your friends. But the schools don't allow that, do they? That's when they step up and they try to show you many things that they should not be showing you, that aren't even real. They bring them up, they give them as alternatives. Latency is a very, very important period, and it lasted in the previous era that someone mentioned over here until people were about 12. Up until about 12, maybe late 11, they started to realize that there were gender different feelings, etc. But before that, believe me, they were in latency. They were busy. Removing that from our children is a horrible thing. We mustn't do that. Don't sexualize them so young. Don't bring that all in. Well, I just don't understand it, why it's become so popular. I have some conjecture about that, but I will let it ride today. However, you understand what I'm saying. And please don't allow your schools. There are people in the school who have a positive feeling about these feelings and they want to share them. Make sure the school is following its regulations. That's all the school should be. And if you don't like the regulations, you guys are activists, you know how to do it, go. All right? Make sure the regulations are correct. So, I think I'm kind of done. I've taught you how to raise children.
Great job.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Dr. Flisser. All right, so, we have a panelist with a question.
When does latency start? You said it could go up till 12 years old, and can you give me a definition of latency?
Okay, it starts around 3 or 4 after the Oedipal period. It's after the Oedipal period. These things are not exactly like on your birthday kind of thing, but between 3 or 4, that's when you go into latency. You've gone through the Oedipal period, and you know, as my little boy did, that he wasn't going to marry me. That's all over with, and now he played until he got to feel that.
And so, would you, like, how would you define latency?
Okay.
A lack of sexual desire, or like, how would you define it?
It is the feelings at that point are latent. They are not active. There are latent feelings at that time, unless they're activated for what I consider in inappropriate ways.
Right.
By the way, our media does it too, as you very well know. So it's very difficult to do, to avoid. But it's important because it's calming and wonderful not to have to worry about that when you're wondering how high the ball is going to bounce.
Are there any things that you think might be done at the federal level to require schools to be transparent about what they're doing to the children, so that parents have additional protection if they find the activities of the school objectionable?
Yes, legislation is important, but really it's parental action that's more important. You, right? You're sitting right here, you can do it, right? You can do it. You have to go in there and find out. And there are many ways to do it. There are organizations, etc., as you already have. So that's what I say. Yes, there's federal legislation, but I'm really more interested in the government that's closest to you. I think that's the one that's most important.
What do we have
Yes.
a right to do?
Absolutely.
Or how do you even know any of this is going on?
Right. You have to know everything that's going on. It's
But
where
they
you're
lie
leaving your
to
kid
you.
the whole day.
They lie.
Oh, well, that's illegal to lie. That's illegal to lie. Now, I'll tell you a quick story about a school. One of the independent schools, and I don't want to say that it's in any part of my district that I've named, so it's one of the independent schools, where a teacher dressed up the white children as slave owners and enslaved up and dressed up the black children as slaves and created a little tableau that she wanted to show them to teach them what had happened, right? Okay? And I was asked to give an opinion on this, all right? And I will tell you that luckily I wasn't there that day because unfortunately, it would have been assault and battery, right? And I would have had to go to jail, and I wouldn't be sitting here today. But I'm sure that's what I would have done, because I would have been unable to control myself after seeing something like that. There were people who saw the costumes and everything, all right? But to tell you, the school did ask me what I suggested, and she was fired. All right?
Everyone is, I think we're running a little behind on time. If you could save your question for afterward. We have one more panel to go. Dr. Flister, thank you so much.
I really need your vote. You know
What is your district?
16. Right?
Congressional district.
That's right, my congressional district. I'm running against
Wonderful.
Jamal Bowman.
Okay. We really want to get rid of him.
Right?
Okay, everyone. Our final panel will begin with Bobby Ann Cox, government overreach and how it's destroying our way of life. Bobby Ann, thank you very much for joining us.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Bobby Ann Cox. I'm an attorney here in New York. I've been practicing about 25 years. And I just want to point out, in case it's not really obvious to everybody here, what everybody's been talking about, the panelists so far today, we're all here, we're all talking about this, we're all dealing with this because of one reason. It's called government overreach. So government overreach is when the government does things that they're not supposed to do. And when I say they're not supposed to do it, it means they don't have the power to do it. But they're doing it anyway. I filed the case in the spring, and this summer, Judge Ronald Plotz, New York State Supreme Court judge in Cattaraugus County, ruled in our favor. And he struck down the regulation, and he said, this is unconstitutional, this is illegal, you do not have the power to do this, you are violating not only the Constitution and separation of powers, but you are actually violating existing New York State law. Because we have law in New York State for 70 years, it's section 2120 of the public health law, which says what you do when you need to quarantine somebody because they are a public health threat. The difference is that the regulation that was made by Governor Hochul and the Department of Health had no due process protections to protect the citizens, and the law that we've had for 70 years here in New York does. It has a lot of due process protections to make sure that the government doesn't overreach and doesn't abuse their power. So the governor and the Department of Health made a regulation that conflicted with existing law, conflicted with the Constitution, and it was struck down by the court. Okay, so now, little footnote there, the Attorney General, Letitia James, filed a notice of appeal within a week of our win, and they intend to appeal the decision. I'm going to talk more about that. I think Melissa handed out a flyer to everybody here. I'm doing a talk specifically on that quarantine camp lawsuit on the 29th of October, which is 2 weeks from today. And you can either come in person if you happen to be up in Western New York, in the Rochester, Buffalo area. If not, you can join by Zoom. So there's information on there about it. There's also information on that flyer about something that's really important and pertinent to today's talk. So I hope that you'll check that out on the flyer afterwards. There are different types of government overreach. So the government overreach for my quarantine camp case was coming from the executive branch of government. That was coming from the governor and her Department of Health. 3 branches of government, I'm sure everybody knows, although our children and grandchildren might not know because they're not teaching it really anymore in schools. 3 branches of government, they're all supposed to be co-equal, which means there's no one above the other. And it's the legislative branch, which is the senators and the assembly members here in New York, they make the law. Then we've got the governor and all the departments, including the Department of Health, Department of Education, those are in the executive branch. They're supposed to enforce the laws made by the legislature. And then you have the judicial branch, which is the judges and the courts. So, what we are seeing is government overreach, yes, definitely by the executive, governor, and departments, but we're also seeing it by the legislature. And I'm going to tell you today about 2 bills. So bills are proposed laws. They're not laws yet, but there are 2 bills that you really, really, really need to be aware of. One of them you might be aware of because I wrote a if anybody here is subscribed to my Substack, I wrote a Substack on it last week. It's Assembly Bill A9963. And what it does is it extinguishes parental rights. Very, very simply. The bill extinguishes parental rights. It allows a minor child, minor meaning under 18, child, to make their own medical decisions. And not only can they make their own medical decisions, you as the parent get no say. You as the parent are not allowed to know about it, and you as the parent have to pay for it. But when you pay for it, the insurance companies are not allowed to tell you what you're paying for. They can make their own medical decisions. The proposed law says that includes, of course, medical procedures, it includes mental health procedures, it includes dental, it includes anything that has to do with the child's body, okay? So somebody asked me, before I sat down and wrote my Substack article on it, they said, well, does that include, sex-changing medications or operations? I said, yes, it does. Read the language of the bill. Yes, it does, in fact. Okay, so, and then somebody else asked me, does that include inoculations, vaccines? I said, yes, it does. There's specifically a paragraph in the bill that talks about the child can decide for themselves. The minor child, your 5-year-old in kindergarten, can decide for themselves if they want to get a specific inoculation. Okay, so that's Bill A9963. It is being proposed by 6 New York State Assembly members, and I hope on this flyer that you've gotten today, the backside has the information for my Substack. Please go on, it's free. You don't have to pay for it, it's free. Please go on my Substack and read the article and then share it everywhere. Because on that bill, A9963, in my Substack, I list the 6 New York State Assembly members who are pushing this bill.
With their addresses?
I list them, and then I also list who's running against them, because here in New York State, on November 8th, very thankfully, we are allowed to elect new New York State senators, new New York State Assembly members, new governor, and new attorney general.
Right.
As well as seats for Congress, as we heard earlier. But we have a golden opportunity in New York State to wipe the slate clean. This is so crucial because this quarantine camp lawsuit, yes, I won. Now I'm probably going to have to fight off an appeal. But as one of the speakers had said earlier, we cannot use lawsuits to win this battle, okay? I'm doing the quarantine camp case for free. I'm doing it pro bono. I cannot keep doing cases pro bono. No attorneys can keep doing cases pro bono. We have to be on the offensive, which means we have to change the leadership at the top. If we did have leadership that honored the Constitution, that understood the Constitution, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in right now, because separation of powers is being abolished. We cannot abolish separation of powers. If you think about it in the example of my quarantine camp case, let's say that the judge didn't rule in my favor. Let's say that the judge said, oh, sorry, yes, Governor Hochul and the Department of Health are allowed to, does anybody here not know about the quarantine camp regulation? Raise your hand if you don't know about it. Yeah, okay, so I'll just really quick. The regulation gave the power to the Department of Health to pick and choose which New Yorkers they would lock up or lock down. They could have locked you up or locked you down in your house, or they could have removed you from your house and put you into a quarantine facility of their choosing for however long they wanted, days, weeks, months, no time limit, no age restriction, so they could have taken you, they could have taken your child, they could have taken your grandchild, they could have taken your elderly, ailing parent. You had no say where you went, you had no say how long you stayed there, and you had no way to get out. What I mean by that is, when we were having oral arguments in front of the judge back in May, the judge specifically asked the Attorney General's office, let's say you take a family and you put them into quarantine or isolation. You put them into a facility, you put them into a hospital, wherever you're putting them. How do they get out? And there was a really pregnant pause on the part of the Attorney General's office. And then finally he said, well, they could hire a lawyer and they could sue. So that's how the Attorney General and the Governor want you to get out of quarantine, by hiring a lawyer and suing. Okay? Lawsuits take time. Mine was expedited because I requested it and the judge granted it. But otherwise, lawsuits take years. Right? They take a lot of money because they take a lot of time and energy on the part of the lawyers. So it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. So the other bill I want to talk about is Bill A6616. A just means it's coming from the New York State Assembly as opposed to the Senate. But there is a sister bill in the Senate. Okay, and this one says that it's proposing that there be kindergarten through 12 sexual education in all schools. Kindergarten through 12th grade. Again, 5-year-olds. This bill, unfortunately, is being sponsored by over a dozen New York State Assembly members. So that will be the topic of my next Substack article, which, if I can get to it, will be released this evening. But this is the kind of information that people don't know about. People don't know about the quarantine camp regulation. They don't know about my lawsuit. They don't know that I defeated the governor, and they don't know that the governor and the Attorney General want to appeal it, because the mainstream media is sweeping it under the rug. People don't know about A9963, that extinguishes parental rights, because no one's talking about it in the mainstream media. People don't know about A6616, that is going to, if passed, require schools, public schools, charters, whatever it is, in New York State to give sex education to children starting in kindergarten, okay? I don't think the language includes that, but I would have to double check that. So we need to spread the word far and wide. We have less than 30 days until Election Day here in New York, so this needs to get out. You need to post things on your social media. You need to go to places and talk to people about it. You need to hand out flyers. You want to there are more flyers of mine in the back on the table. Take them, hand them out, pin them up in in public places, the bulletin board at the supermarket or the bulletin board at your library. But, people need to hear this. They need to know, because on November 9th, when we wake up, who is governor in New York State is going to matter so much. Who is the Attorney General in New York State is going to matter so much. Who are your state senators and your state assembly members is going to matter so much. We speak through our representatives. If we do not vote in the right people, we are in big trouble. We are in big trouble. Okay, because the government overreach, their theory is, catch me if you can. I'm going to do this, even though I know I can't because the Constitution doesn't let me. I'm going to do it anyway. Catch me if you can. What lawyer is going to spend the time and the money and the energy and all this to sue me? Catch me if you can. Okay? We have to stop the catch me if you can. We have to change the leadership at the top. If anybody doesn't know, Michael Henry is running against Letitia James for Attorney General. Look him up, go on his website, read about him, make informed decisions. If anybody doesn't know, Lee Zeldin is running against Governor Hochul. Again, if you don't know, look him up, read his website, read articles about him, educate yourself, educate those around you. You can't just go to the polls on November 8th. You have to bring people with you. You have to bring your friends, you have to bring your family members, make it a social event. Hey, let's go vote and let's go grab a drink after, right? You have to do it. This is such a crucial election. So I'm going to end, because my timer is timing me. So I'm going to end, and I'm happy to take a couple questions.
I've been paying attention to the quarantine camp since before they even voted it. I watched the Department of Health vote on it. And then the new bill, I read your Substack, so that's how I learned about it. But I haven't seen Zeldin speak up a lot about it, and it's a little disheartening because what's scary is I've noticed that most New Yorkers don't know about the quarantine camp thing, and you would hope that people running against them would make a lot of noise.
Right.
Like it should be shouted from the rooftops, and I don't see it happening. So do you know their stances on it? Are they aware? Are they going to talk about it?
Yes, great question. So Lee Zeldin I've spoken to him personally about it, and Michael Henry, I've spoken to him personally about it. They are aware of it. Lee Zeldin has come out, he's put on his website something denouncing, when Hochul said she was going to appeal this summer, he did put something out, a statement on his website saying, this is ridiculous, this is atrocious, in essence, those are not his exact words, but he denounced her intended appeal. And he also, he's tweeted about it. I'm not on Twitter, but yeah, he's tweeted about it as well. So his position, you can definitely find on, it's public that he is totally against this. And I just want to point out, the Attorney General's office, Letitia James, used your tax dollars and mine to fight that quarantine camp case, okay? And they fought me tooth and nail. And if you tune in on the 29th, I don't want to take the time now, but if you tune in on the 29th of October, I'm going to get into detail about, the games they played and the shenanigans they pulled during the lawsuit. There's a group of, there's Senator George Borrello, Assemblyman Chris Tagan, Assemblyman Mike Waller came on the lawsuit. So they are the plaintiffs on the lawsuit together with the citizens group Uniting New York State. So people like George Borrello, Senator George Borrello, Assemblyman Chris Tagan, Assemblyman Mike Waller, those are the kinds of people we want to vote back into office. And I'll just point out, Mike Waller is currently an assemblyman from Rockland County, but he's currently running for Congress against so anybody, check out,
I just want to say, if you go to teachersforchoice.org, teachersforchoice.org, scroll down slightly, click on Lee Zeldin's face. There's 24 times he's come out in support of medical freedom against the quarantine camps. So it's all there that you could forward to people when people say, he's not doing nothing. He is. Just go there and you can spread that.
Okay, we have one more question here, and then we're behind schedule, so.
I wanted to ask you about this bill you're talking about, the A9963. As a parent of a young child, I find it atrocious, and is there anything we could do besides just voting to bring more attention to other parents about this? Because I find a lot of people that are not in the same space as me in my shoes as a parent, just, it's not an issue they want to put energy towards if they're not in those parents' shoes. So it feels like an uphill battle to get into these conversations, because I've been trying to, even about the quarantine camps. And, if people aren't in the shoes of parenting with dealing with these issues, the simple fact is they just don't seem to care.
Yeah, so that you're bringing up a good point. So there are a lot of things you can do. Uniting New York State, the citizens group on the quarantine camp case, has a web page specifically about the lawsuit. It's www.unitingnys.com/lawsuit. It should be on the flyer you have. If you go to that page, there are literally steps you can take to get involved. There are things you can do to get involved about the quarantine camp case, but also about A9963 and A6616. We need to raise awareness. Post it on your social media. The problem is that a lot of people don't engage unless it's staring them in the face and they're like, whoa, oh my gosh, wait, you want to take my rights away? Oh, hold on, wait, you're taking my 7-year-old out of my house and taking him to a quarantine camp? Wait a second, wait a minute, let me call for help. It's too late then, okay? The damage is going to be already done. So we have to be proactive about all of these bills. all of these things before they become law. These are bills, so we have the chance to stop them. One of the sponsors, co-sponsors of the bill that you're concerned about, A9963, is a Westchester County representative, Amy Paulin. Okay? So Amy Paulin is one of the co-sponsors of that bill. So I'm in Westchester right now. Anybody here in the audience who Amy Paulin is your current assembly member representative, why don't you check out her opponent?
It's Tom Fix, I think.
Yes.
Tom Fix from Eastchester used to own the True Value.
Yes.
And his
So-
wife is a teacher.
Okay, thank you, I'm sorry, but we.
Okay.
If you look at the bottom of this sheet, NYS.com/lawsuit. If you didn't get one of these, they're on the back table right over there.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Next speaker came all the way from New Jersey. So we have some people who traveled quite a ways today. And his name is Ron Baruti, and he's going to talk to us about legal actions involving critical race theory and his experiences with this and anti-racism. Thank you so much, Ron.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. So many mama bears here, of course, because mama bears are the ones leading the charge, we find. My name is Ron Baruti. Great panelists, great group of people. And the scariest people in the world, to the left, do you know who they are? Do you know who the scariest people are? You people. The left is scared of you. The left is scared of you. Don't think they are not. They hate when you go to their meetings and you speak up against them. They will retaliate against you because this is what they're learning to do from the up aboves, the elites. This is what they're doing. There are two ways to push back. There's a legislative process and running for office, government, and that's great. But we all know we're in New York here, and I'm from New Jersey. I'm also a New York attorney. New Jersey is a few steps ahead of you guys. There is a transgender regulation. Parents are not being told about their kids' choices. It's a regulation. We'll be suing very soon on that issue. The other way is the lawsuit process, and that's what I think is actually the greatest opportunity we have right now to stop this nonsense. Now, I know I don't do pro bono cases. I'm a free market capitalist. No, but it's not only that. I have bills to pay, and I believe that, you know, if I'm going to have skin in the game, so should the people hiring me. My grandfather escaped communism in 1948 from Yugoslavia. He risked everything that was important to him to get on a 10-horsepower boat to cross the sea at night during a storm, and he made it. And if he didn't make it, he'd have been shot, and so would his whole family, including my mother. Okay? We are losing our freedom. Do you know why you're free? Do you know what freedom is? Who knows why? Can someone tell me what makes you free? You see, we don't even know the answer to that question. Someone got an answer?
God.
Well, perhaps.
And the reality of rights to be able to speak freely.
The reality to speak freely, what freedom is and what rights are. Our rights are our humanity. It's our inalienable right to talk about it in the Declaration of Independence. Read it, it's the greatest thing ever written. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, endowed by our Creator with these natural rights. These are, what they mean is that we each have a common humanity, which nobody talks about anymore. We can be black, white, transgender, whatever, it doesn't matter. We have a common humanity, and we're made up of certain stuff. We think freely, we speak freely, we worship, we don't worship. We make these decisions for ourselves as human beings, and these are our inalienable rights. When schools are telling you that your children have to think a certain way, they are robbing your child of freedom. As an attorney, I stand up every day to fight for freedom, and it's hard. It's hard for my clients to pay me. I understand that you all have bills to pay, car payments, house payments, groceries, maybe you got a lake house, college tuition. I got one in college, I've already got two out. Look, these are the hard things. These are hard choices we have to make. But if we don't stand up and be the scary people that we are, they're gonna run you over like a steamroller. And you know what? I have nowhere to go with my kids. There's no place left. This is the last best hope on earth. This is it. I have cases, regular people. Well, first of all, my case that really got me is I've been practicing 30 years. I sued Mayor de Blasio in the city of New York on the vaccine passport to get into restaurants, gyms, etc. I represent gym owners, etc. Got a lot of notoriety. That case is still kicking around. I filed suit in the federal courts. I filed suit in the federal courts because we have the greatest opportunity in the history of our modern country to win on these issues in our federal courts, not at the district court level where the trials are. Maybe not in the appellate courts, which now are much better than they used to be. The United States Supreme Court, if your nasty neighbor, Hillary Clinton, had won the election, this country was finished. Because she would have appointed someone to replace Scalia, someone to replace Ginsburg, and probably someone to replace Breyer, and it would be a rubber stamp court. And anything that she pushed through on a written hand note would be law. We have now the opportunity, because of President Trump, to take these issues to the Supreme Court. Win, lose, or draw. We may not win. I'm not saying we have an ace, we don't have the trump card, so to speak. But we have justices who believe in what I call the proper interpretation of the Constitution. What's the meaning of the Constitution? What's the purpose of the Constitution? It's not to be everyone else's grievance piece of paper and to be ignored. It has a meaning. It's a contract. We, the people, gave to the government certain powers, and we are the holders of the power, and we are the ones who are supposed to be standing up and fighting. So what is my goal with my cases? And I'm going to tell you about it. We're actually supposed to talk about critical race theory. I have cases on vaccines. I have cases on masking. I have my law partner was arrested at a school board meeting. Only New Jersey parent arrested. Didn't wear a mask. She has 2 special needs kids. She never wore a mask. They wanted to take her down. They arrested her. Know what it means when an attorney gets arrested? That could be a real problem for our law licenses. But you know what? We stand up for what's right, and we fight for what's right, and we do what we need to do for what's right. Because if we don't do it, we're going to lose everything. We're going to be looking for that 10 horsepower boat to take us to where? Nowhere. This is our time to fight. Yes, the legislatures, yes, fight, but you're in New York State, let's face it, it's an uphill battle. And let's face it, there are problems with voting. We know this. If you don't think there's a problem with voting, pay attention. There are problems with voting, especially in blue states, okay? So we have to be proactive, look to the courts. And that means what I do with my clients, I work with them, I come up with rates and payment plans that will help them get through it. It's never easy. It's not easy for me. I could charge $525 an hour for commercial work, and I still do sometimes. But I want to take these cases because these are the ones that matter to me. I want to honor my grandfather's legacy every day. That's what I do. I think about my grandfather, what he did, how much he risked to give me this opportunity to stand here before you today with a law license. It's amazing. What a great opportunity. Why wouldn't I take this opportunity to honor my grandfather's legacy? And it's also an opportunity for me so that my grandkids might have the opportunities that I had. We all have the opportunity here to honor your forebears, the people who struggled, the people who worked, the people who gave you the opportunities in your life, and to honor your children and grandchildren, nieces, nephews, neighbors, whomever it is. We are Americans. We are free people, but we are losing that freedom. So I came here to talk about critical race theory. Transgender, by the way. In New Jersey, I'm going to give you a quick transgender thing. It is so screwed up. Everyone's doing the same thing in these blue states, by the way. Just different methods. It's all from on high. They all have their plan. It's all a big power play to crush you, crush the family, crush God, crush the things
that make us free people. The United States of America, and by the way, the Supreme Court of the United States, Troxel versus Granville. I don't know if you know about Troxel. Parents have a fundamental right to make the decisions concerning the care, custody, and control of their children. Parents have a fundamental right to make decisions concerning the care, custody, and control of their children. In New Jersey, if my child Jane, and I'm going to tell you an exact true story. I'm going to change the names. Woman calls us, her son, call him Ron. Her son Ron goes to school. He's in 4th grade. She gets a call, she goes to work, she gets a call at work. Mrs. Jones, Jane, is hurt. Must be the wrong number. I don't have a Jane. Ring, ring, ring. Mrs. Jones, Jane is hurt. They cannot call Ron, Ron. They must call Ron, Jane. They can't tell you at school they're calling Ron, Jane. Mrs. Jones ultimately finds out that at school, Ron is Jane. She finds out at the end of the day, after a kid has not gotten treatment, because being called Jane is more important than getting treatment for bleeding. This is how sick and warped these people are. We must fight this tooth and nail. We cannot stop until we win. And they are scared of you. In my vaccine case, every single time we push and we get close to winning, Mayor Blasio had no authority at all, no legal authority to do that vaccine mandate. We were going to win. We were up in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, just next notch below the Supreme Court. As soon as we made our arguments, we're ready to go to oral argument. Guess what happened? No more mandate. Issue's moot. Go back to court. I said, no, wait, the issue's not moot. It's March 2022. Baseball season's about to start. The same reasons they have the mandate for the employees. And I said, right here in the New York Post, it's saying New York Mets and New York Yankees players who are not vaccinated can't play. It's the same issue, not moot. 2 days later, exemption for baseball players. Well, that's kind of shocking, isn't it? So now we do get sent back to the district court, and I've just briefed, put up a new complaint. I'm now challenging the employer mandate, and guess what happened? No employer mandate anymore. How about that? But I'm not suing on behalf of public entities, so they still have an employer mandate. They are scared to be confronted. My goal is to get these cases through the initial period, get some into the discovery phase, and those like who want to sue teachers. You don't sue teachers for money. You sue teachers to have that camera pointing at them with lights, being asked questions under the hot light, and they have to answer for their actions. And that's the last thing they want to do. A lot of admiration for Randy Weingarten coming to your show, because these people are chicken shit. Pardon my English. They are scared of you. Co-fight. If you want to file a lawsuit, if you think you may have a right, all of these things. CRT violates Title VI. Title VI is any federal agency that gets federal funding and they have racial discrimination in the program, it's illegal. You sue them. There's an equal protection clause in the United States Constitution. You have to treat people, when people are treated based upon race and not their personal individual selves, it's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. Let me read from you from the highly esteemed original case about public schools that we learn about all the time, Brown versus Board of Education. Brown versus Board of Education was centered on the premise that each person is an individual, that you must be treated as an individual, not a race. So when they're telling kids that white people this and black people that and yellow, no. Brown versus Board of Education says you can't do that. It's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. Miller versus Johnson, 1995, at the heart of the Constitution's guarantee of equal protection lies the simple command that the government must treat citizens as individuals, not as simply components of racial, religious, sexual, or national class. Critical race theory anti-racism is unconstitutional. When your government school is teaching that, it's unconstitutional. Fight it. I have a fight. It's going on right now. It's got a little bit of press. It's going to get more. It's not about press. I got 1 minute. It's about winning. As Chief Justice Roberts said, not everyone's favorite, not mine, but he said in Parents Involved in the Community Schools versus Seattle School District, the way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. It's really actually, it's funny, but it's not. It's not funny. Because here we are, once again, where the left has now decided to do what they fought against. They're now treating people based upon race. They want to return us to those days, and it can never happen. We must fight. If you need to talk to me about anything you have, like I said, I do New York work, but I'll be glad to talk to you regardless, because there are ways to fight this stuff. I have a shots on goal theory. My shots on goal theory is as follows. I will sue anywhere in the United States if I can. I have cases in Ohio, I've had cases in California. I'm admitted to the Kentucky bar. I'm going to be filing a suit in Florida soon. Fight this everywhere. Fight this on all fronts. Do not let them rest. Keep on pushing. You're going to lose some battles, but the more shots on goal you take, like in hockey and basketball, chances are you're going to sink one and get us to the Supreme Court. Yep. And then when we get to the Supreme Court, we're going to have our shot. We're going to have a real shot. And we're going to have, hopefully, a fair fight. Because the fight's not fair here. It's not fair in New Jersey. It's not fair in our lower courts. It's not fair in our state court system. It's not fair. Our shot is in the United States Supreme Court, and maybe the appellate courts as well. Thank you all very much.
I also wanted to ask you about what is your opinion on Title IX? Because that is the new area that I think that we need to look at for our school district, because there's a lot of things that is happening with Title IX. If you could maybe just tell parents what Title IX is about and what's going on.
Yeah, so Title IX is a federal law that basically provides that women have to be treated equally in men with respect to things like scholarships, financing, whatever. And one of the things we're looking at, if we're going to file a transgender related action, is Title IX, because it discriminates against, it does discriminate against natural females, right? The craziest thing is this swimmer guy, girl, whatever it is. I mean, that's a total Title IX violation in my view. You know, suddenly you're supposed to have equal amount of scholarships for men and women. And suddenly some guy is going to say, well, I'm a woman, and so I get the scholarship now. What? That to me is a Title IX violation. I also think, by the way, transgenderism and CRT, and these are issues I'm looking at for the future, they're religions. These are religions. This is not a fact. It's not a scientific truth that there's transgenderism. I have XY or XX chromosomes. That means I'm a male or a female. There are people who have genetic mutations. Okay, we understand that, but that's not what we're talking about here. The overwhelming majority of the world has XX or XY chromosomes, man, woman. If you're telling me that I can have one set of chromosomes and be the other sex, that's not science, that's religion. And so they are foisting religion on us in violation of the First Amendment. CRT, same thing. Aren't they, isn't it religious? White people are this way, so-called white. I call it so-called white people. Who's really white? Who's really black? This is nonsense. We're human beings, all of us. And, you know, so white people have their racial ways, and their biases, inherent biases they learn at birth. Brown people can never do better because of the white people's. What is this? This is a religion. This is not fact. So this is another way to fight. We're going to fight these people on every front, every way we can. We're going to punch them in the nose. We're going to shine the bright lights on them. And how do you afford it? Real quickly, how do you afford it? Call me. I just saw a story where a transgender male was changing in the girls' locker room, women's locker room. I forget if it was college or high school. And a bunch of girls complained they were uncomfortable with it. They have to go to a different room and change. They have to. They have to. This is wrong. It's okay to say it's wrong. It's wrong. This is wrong.
Last but not least, Angela Schulte from Save Our Schools. And Angela, thanks so much for coming. And you can read all about her on your paper there and the website and all of that. Thanks again, Angela, for coming.
So thank you for being here today. Thank you also to my colleagues here on the panel. Today, my comments are a tribute to the hundreds of courageous parents in Westchester County who have contacted SOS. The phone rings, the stories start, the heartbeats go, and people in Westchester County are scared. They're scared. I've counseled more moms who say, what do I tell my husband when I don't want to send my kids to school any longer because of what I'm hearing is happening in the classroom? Ladies and gentlemen, this is happening in the classroom. So one of the first things you have to overcome is fear. You also have to learn in your daily lives to recognize when you are being bullied. We watch it for our kids. If somebody came up to your son who was gonna swing a ball, or your daughter who was on roller skates for the first time and just pushed her out of the way or told him to get lost, you'd fight for your kid. Now, this is the same thing, but parents immediately in Westchester County retreated. Personally, that amazed me. It really amazed me. It's not a criticism, it's a comment. Unless you have been on the ground game, you don't know about this. I commend every lawsuit that's being filed. But somebody said, quite correctly, what are we gonna do? Maggie said it. I'm a lawyer, I could do it pro bono. Maggie, thanks for being part of the team. I could do it pro bono, but she can't. She's got the kids, all right? So let's talk about how we get from here to there. I'm also happy because we have such intellectual and academic views of what's happening. Look, again, let's go back to the ground. As parents, that's not what you were looking for. You were looking to protect your child. In 2020, or hindsight is 2020, ironically 2020 was the year that went south. You were locked up, I was locked up. I really didn't like it. I didn't like being told to wear my mask. I was in the risk group, whatever that is. I didn't like to be told to get vaxxed. I was in the risk group. I hated that. So the point is that as I was leaving church one day, I heard about a drag queen story hour that was going to take place in the Rye-Free Reading Room. 3 weeks later, teaching 3 to 8-year-olds how great drag queens are. Well, thank God the younger moms at church were like, you know, what is this about? We formed a tight group. We wrote a petition. We stayed on the reason subjects. We didn't go into the homophobic thing. We didn't go anywhere. We knew what we needed to do. So what does this have to do with critical race theory? This was the first salvo in Rye. We won at the Board of Trustees. We did a petition, 150 people signed. Board of Trustees were going to meet the next week. We marched in with 50 people. They did not know what was going on in their library. They abdicated their responsibilities. They heard about it, they were embarrassed. Some of these were founders of Rye, their families, not them, but their families. Because Rye as a community was founded in the 1860s. They immediately canceled that event. We were happy we left. Game one, no. 3 days later, we heard that the Library Board of Trustees made a mistake. They were going to postpone it. Oh, really? Why did that happen? It was the first time we realized, and we do this as parents, and you know, we don't realize what's going on in our community. We didn't know that with the 2008, crash, came an entire new group of people. We weren't paying attention. Now they're our neighbors, we love them. We walk the dogs together, they play with your kids, we talk about gardening. This group of people were transplanted in Rye, and I'm sure of it, to inculcate our city with wokeism. And that is what happened. So what did they do when they heard about these egregious things that we said, which were not egregious? And they, by the way, started to attack us on social media. Now, I am not on social media. The Lakeland team over here knows that. Sorry, girls, ladies, mama bears. I'm not on social media. I think it's a place to get bullied every day. It's a place to get short answers for big problems. But that's me. So I couldn't believe what these people were doing. This was, you know, these were the moms jumping out of the big cars and going to tennis. It was really disheartening. The only thing that saved Drag Queen Story, our kids from it, in fact, was COVID. It's a high price to pay, don't you think? One of my parents told me, and this was the first time a parent got a view of what was going on in the classroom, over the shoulder of her 10th grader. She heard the teacher tell him that we were a systemically racist country, that the police targeted black people, and by the way, that's why we needed DEI, that's why we needed to change. Not so much. By this point, we had already formed SOS, and we started with a ground game, and that ground game was one where we went right into the trenches. You know, so we're really in the early part of 2021 now. When we wrote the mission statement for Save Our Schools, we were very careful. We also understood the wokeism of what was going on. We were also very lucky because our board was comprised of very smart people. I always try to put very smart people around myself because I know I'm not as smart as I would like to be. So our board of directors got together, and one of my favorite board of director members is Candace DeRusi. And David, you should know her name. And Cordes also. The whole entire board was amazing. Well, we would get together and talk about what are we going to do? How are we going to tell these people what to do? What's our mission statement? We spent days talking about it. We wanted to be clear. We looked around on other websites to see. Everybody was sort of willing to fight, but it was a little vanilla. Well, you know, we don't want to say it this way, we don't want to say it that way. What's that about? So we came up with our mission statement to be very clear. We didn't want any ambiguity about it. We didn't want it. So we were pretty clear on the K-12 curricula should be rigorously grounded in the core subjects. Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution of the United States. Liberty, justice, equality for all. There's your word. Equality and equity are very, very different. You know, we're getting trophies instead of thought leaders. So you have them here, but you were thought leaders in the community. The next thing we wanted to do was to be sure that our parents, through anybody who's on the website, understood our positions. Our children should be taught how and why the United States is the largest, most free, and successful multiracial country in human history. That is true. Does anybody want to disagree with me on that? Anybody? You can't disagree. The founders who came here, Christopher Columbus didn't get on that boat to come over here and start a slave trade. Are you kidding me? Are we perfect? No, we're not perfect. But they are selling, and I think that, you know, I think that Rob said it the best, you know, they're just snowing you. How, 2? Oh, that's annoying, 2? Can I have 3? Yes. Okay. So let's talk about the rest of this, and then we'll keep going. When you form a group, and anybody in this room who wants to be a part of a team, I don't care who you join, you have to have a captain, you have to have an information officer, you have to have a research analyst, and you must have a database manager. You're going into business. Everybody is not going to run and do your lawsuit. Get over it. I am sorry. We would love to do that. Some of the ways we spread the word about SOS, we undertook a project with another NAS member, Jay Bergman, because Jay and Candace were colleagues. And Jay is a history professor at Central Connecticut, and he wrote a brilliant piece about the 1619 project. By the way, that's still a problem. So he wrote a brilliant piece, and he sent it to all the Connecticut superintendents of schools. And he rang, Candace up and said, I think SOS can do this. And she called me, she said, can we do this? I said, of course. She said, do you know how to do this? I said, of course. Well, we did. So that went out to 726 superintendents of schools in New York State. And it moved the needle while we were working on the ground. It did move the needle because I got calls from some very interesting superintendents of schools. Number one, the one in Rye, New York, who sent me an email and said, is this really you? Well, who do you think it is? It says Angela Barone. My point is that this is a bullying organization who will do anything to reduce your ability to work as parents, all right? So I'm going to go right to the end of this and tell you that 1619 project we did very well. We are still looking at ways to stop it because the courts are now involved in it. There was a big pushback, with this great revisionism history. And it is being worked on now to be rewritten again by the same people who wrote the first one, because they have to fix it. There are lawsuits now pending in Alaska, Iowa, Michigan, Missouri, New York, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Washington, and West Virginia. So all of this is out there. These are all the nuanced points you need to pay attention to as parents, because to get to the big point so that we can get Mr. Baruti into a court, or some of our people on our board, we have pro bono legal on the board, but it's only to help out and to get over a hump. So I'm going to just go to this because I can see that Rosemary's getting nervous. Woke speak is something you want to pay attention to. The language that is put in front of the school boards, that is going on in the classroom, is dangerous. It's the language of pronouns, it's the language of change words. It is dangerous. It is woke speak. And if you want to read a little bit about it, you can look at a piece by David Hansen. You know who he is. Okay, Dave, right. Richard Davis Hansen. Okay, Richard. No.
Victor Davis Hansen.
That's it. So, look at that, and go and look at an international linguist who's brilliant, David Crystal. That's another one. We need to understand that because it's going on in school. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about is critical gender theory. Chris Rufo just published a brilliant essay on critical gender theory. And he broke it down into 4 key areas. All right, I want you to go and look at this. We just put it on our website, and I'll tell you why. He broke it down into key concepts. Radical gender theorists argue that biological sex, the male-female gender binary, and heterosexuality are socially constructed. That's not true. There is a creator smarter than these guys. All right? They are human inventions rather than features of objectivity. All right, this is a great section. You will have to spend a lot of time because gender theory is not for the faint of heart. It is not. You're going to go through this essay that Chris wrote and you're going to have to pay attention. Drag queen story hours comes right into that. So I'm just going to, circle back, as Jen Psaki would say. Radical gender theory in schools is the next one. Again, he says, radical gender theory uses a series of sophisticated linguistic tools to manipulate the discourse and influence children in public schools. I'm not going to finish that. I'm just going to remind you, woke speak.
New speak, same thing.
Woke speak. Woke speak's coming like great speed over the woke net. I call it the woke net. As a matter of fact, there's no synonym for that, so we have to figure out how to claim it. Because this is a dangerous tool. I think, was it you that said we got to get rid of that? The internet? It's not helping anybody. It's toxic with information that you have to really reassert yourself and find. So let's finish. How to get organized. That was number 4 in Chris's subjects, and he takes you through it very quickly. He ends with a subtitle of Join the Grassroots Network of Parent Groups. And he names 5. Parents Defending Education, Moms for Liberty, Center for Renewing America, No Left Turn in Education, and Save Our Schools.
Right, congratulations.
That happened because of you, of the team leaders in this room. It happened because you got out of your homes, talked to your neighbors, formed groups. You don't need 100 people, you just need to be honest. So today I'm going to end with this point. I'd like to close with Chris's last line of his parents' activism section. And he says, I'd like to, oh, I said that. I'm starting to look like Joe Biden. You need levity in this because otherwise it gives you a headache. All right. And he reminds you that they are national organizations that provide resources, coordination for local parent groups. Contact them to see if there's a chapter in your area. If not, start one. There's strength in numbers, and these organizations can help guide your local group. Today, you leave better equipped than anybody I have ever known in Westchester County, possibly in the country, with an arsenal of information. It's really incredible. Take it, use it, don't go home, don't hide. Don't be afraid of your Board of Education. The Lakeland team sitting over there, within 6 months, got the superintendent of schools fired. And that, I think, is it. So I'm going to say thank you, and lastly, vote.
Transgenderism, I wonder if we don't give the game away by using the same language as the left. The very term gender has only been applied to human beings since the 1990s, basically. It's a linguistic term, and once we use gender, I have to fill out a form at the hospital asking me what my gender is. I cross out gender, I write sex. I mean, how often, how many times can we personally just fight against the use of the word gender? Refuse to use it. Don't say it.
Can I just add here to that, because I agree with you, and I mentioned the linguistic scholar, David Crystal, and he actually, and I just started to look at this seriously because this is a serious issue, and we're going to confront it with the teams. It takes hundreds of years to change a language, hundreds. And the reason I think that this is so prevalent is because of the woke net. So we are being conned into talking this way. I agree with you 100%. I wouldn't let my child have a pronoun. If you're in a corporate environment, tell them you'd rather leave than not. Don't be afraid. I've told parents this before. Well, I don't know. We'll get fired. Okay. What are your choices? Your kids are going to be brainwashed, and you're having a heart attack anyway. So you are right. And his work is incredible. It's too many things to talk about, but I looked at the linguistic scholars in America and overseas, and I wasn't impressed with Noam Chomsky, so I just passed him right over. But David Crystal is incredible, and I think you'll enjoy the way he writes. He's humble, which is very nice.
So how are we going to make any influence when people are so worried about their own lives?
So let me give you a couple of thoughts on that, Christine, and I understand where you're coming from. I talked to families who packed up their children and left. You don't have to do that. You really need a small core group. You do need to be vocal in front of the Board of Education. You need to choose your battles. Those team positions are very, very important because you learn within a team structure to think strategically, which is very important. So that's one of the reasons that our parents feel, no matter what your background is, you feel out of control in front of that school board. You can coalesce with a small group of people, pick your battles, decide whether you're writing a FOIA or not, what is your end goal. Now, about being frightened, SOS webmaster was called at home. BLM in Northern Westchester County has tried to destroy the organization as much as they wanted to. We managed to mentor our groups so that they are not at risk. We are at risk. So again, it was discussed here today. Speak modestly, speak quietly, be tempered. As long as you have the truth on your side, you don't have to worry. You don't have to scream at the board. As a matter of fact, you shouldn't. But you should be watching for reactions of those people. Who's looking fragile? How often is the superintendent putting his head down? I'm going to tell you, the superintendent works he works for you, and you can ignore him. The board makes the decision. We began to do that in Lakeland. It was a good strategy. It takes work. You just can't, leave your everyday, life and say, okay, now I'm going to go over there and fight. It takes work. And they've never gotten near SOS, and let's hope that nobody's in the room, they'll try again. But they did, my webmaster did leave. She was afraid. And I said, gee, I'm amazed they got your phone number at home. It took me 3 years. So they're very, 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 they're deliberate, but once they found they didn't find us, they're quiet. They do like to go after you, though. I wouldn't worry about it. I really wouldn't. Yes, David?
This is not a tactical suggestion for tomorrow, but we need solidarity.
Yes.
The Polish Union, we need the national union
Yeah.
of everybody who's resisting the woke, 100 million people across the country. He should be in charge.
Michael, did you have something?
I just want to say, I agree completely. It's a small group that changes anything ever in this country's history. It's not a large group. And if you can't do what you were doing today, if you need to change it, do something else. You can help with money. You can help behind the scenes. Just figure out how to go, because we don't need millions of people. We need that small group that's strategic. That's who wins.
The banks are woke. The banks are going to try. It's the Chinese social credit system that we have. The banks, there is a way to fight against the banks. I intend to fight against the banks too. We're going to fight everybody. Okay, we're going to fight the banks. We have to fight them on every front. But the banking system is corrupt. And just like big tech is corrupt, just like all the major, just like Moderna and Pfizer. You know what Moderna's stock symbol is? mRNA. Cute, isn't it? Isn't that cute? They're all corrupt, okay? And they have to be fought. Every one of these people has to be fought. Every one of these institutions must be fought. Because if they win here, they're going to win. They know they can win little battles or big battles. We're not going to win every battle. But if we don't fight any battle, they're just going to walk right in.